Cut day across the National Football League. A lot of players getting cut today from multiple different teams, including my Cleveland Browns. We're going to discuss that, plus more on the Guardians and Major League Baseball, all coming up for you right here on Raw Takes. Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. If you like this show, please make sure to like and subscribe. Also, check us out on social media. You can find us at Hoty Raw Takes on Instagram, Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty on Facebook, or you can follow me at X/Twitter at HotyAndrew. I want to emphasize that most of the moves being made by NFL teams today are not official as I'm recording this, so things may change by the time you're watching. However, the deadline is at 4 o'clock, and it's still about 3 o'clock as I record this, so that is the case in terms of the teams making moves with some of the players. Not all of them are official as I'm talking about it. I just want to emphasize that during this edition of Raw Takes. So let's get to some of the moves that have been made today. As you know, I'm Cleveland-based, so we're going to start things off with my Browns. It's already been reported Siaki Ika will be cut along with Michael Woods. To me, those moves make sense. I mean, I really didn't expect too much out of Siaki Ika, along with the fact that I just don't see the emphasis X factor in Michael Woods either. So to me, those moves kind of make sense for my Browns to move on into a different direction. I think at the wide receiver spot, the Browns aren't given enough credit for the fact they haven't really drafted wide receivers well, but they do a pretty good job getting them in the free agency market, along with trades. Amari Cooper we got in a trade. If you want to go back, Odell Beckham Jr. didn't work out here, but we still got him in a trade. Jarvis Landry was via trade, so those are just some moves of the past. And Jerry Jeudy, obviously, in a trade. I personally believe Jerry Jeudy's going to be very good. I was not a huge fan of giving him that contract right away, but I do believe Jerry Jeudy has a big ceiling for him. It just depends on who's throwing him the ball. And when you're with the Denver Broncos, quarterback is kind of a tough situation the last couple seasons. So we'll see how Jerry Jeudy pans out. But I personally think that was a good move for the Browns. But that's not the thing. They're not given enough credit for the fact they actually get wide receivers in the free agent market and in trades relatively pretty well. I think the Browns kind of deserve more credit for that. But Michael Woods, obviously not the guy I think the Browns were necessarily going to need on the roster. Siaki Ika, I think there was a good upside to him, but to me, still there's some lack of consistency there. So those are two moves I'm not surprised by. The other thing that isn't surprising to me, because I know how the Andrew Berry, Kevin Stefanski regime works, is the DTR move so far that's been reported. I think DTR personally is got a lot of upside to be a very good backup, but when I say that, I mean a very good backup. I don't see like a high upside of that guy you want starting for you 17 games out of the year, especially if Deshaun Watson gets hurt. To me, I think he can have one or two good games, and then he's going to have some flaws, but to me, DTR is it's just not going to be consistent with him. He was kind of a mess when he was on the field last year in the regular season. He's had some very good preseason games, but when you're playing preseason teams, you're not playing the 1s and 2s for the most part out on the field. You're playing 3s and 4s who are fighting for jobs in the NFL. So I'm not sure I'm a huge fan of the DTR keeping on the 53-man roster. It just, to me, it kind of lacks more depth that the Browns could easily put in the quarterback room. If you have a quarterback room of Deshaun Watson, Jameis Winston, Tyler Huntley, those are three core guys we have massive sample sizes on. Deshaun Watson, obviously, in recent years, not as much. He's been hurt, had the suspension, yada, yada, yada. But we have a good sample size of what Deshaun Watson's ceiling is, and obviously you're paying him all that money. So he's got to play well. You look at Jameis Winston, a huge sample size. There's some things with Jameis Winston I haven't loved in the past. I'll be very honest about that. But Jameis Winston still has a lot of potential, and we've seen a good sample size from him. I think he could be a very solid, if not one of the most solid backup quarterbacks in the NFL. And I actually think I could trust him to play a full 17-game season. Obviously, we hope that's not the case as Browns fans because we need Deshaun Watson to play very well. But Jameis Winston has a big sample size of very good. Tyler Huntley even does. You could look back at the 2021 season when he played for the Ravens and say, well, most of those games he played in, the Ravens didn't win, but that was mostly because there were some injuries there, and the Ravens absolutely collapsed at the end of 2021, not just because of injuries, but because their roster really was not constructed super duper well after Lamar Jackson got hurt. But when Tyler Huntley took over, he actually did a pretty fine job for the Ravens. So I see that Tyler Huntley has a pretty nice sample size of being a good NFL quarterback. I don't see that with DTR. I don't. DTR had a good game against Pittsburgh last year, but we only won that game 13-10. It wasn't the offense that won that game for us. It was kicker Dustin Hopkins, and it was also the fact that our defense kept us in it from start to finish. They shut down Pittsburgh completely, minus one touchdown run in that game. DTR wasn't phenomenal. He did enough to win. He was good in that game. He just wasn't great. And in the Denver Broncos game, you saw some flashes of good quarterback play, but last year when they played the Broncos, they ended up still losing it, and honestly, DTR wasn't overly impressive. He's had overly impressive preseason games, but I don't get impressed with a guy after seeing him play the 3s and 4s on teams. So if I'm the Browns, the smart way to have done this, especially seeing Deshaun Watson's recent injury history, would have been to keep Deshaun Watson, Tyler Huntley, and Jameis Winston and make that your quarterback room. I wouldn't have kept DTR. I think the project is still massive in developing him into even a good backup. It's a project for the Browns, and as much as I trust the Andrew Berry, Kevin Stefanski regime, I'm not so sure this is going to be the right move. But, last year, they didn't take on the Josh Dobbs idea. They moved off him in the preseason and kept DTR, and that's eventually why they ended up getting Joe Flacco. So, if it worked for the Browns last year, maybe they'll have something up their sleeve to get a guy in the offense that could play well, barring any emergency, knock on wood, obviously, because we want Deshaun Watson, Jameis Winston, and Tyler Huntley to stay on the field, and DTR, of course. But that could be potentially a backup plan maybe they'll have again to get another guy if things really, really go south. Because the Browns cannot waste this defense. They cannot waste a running back in Nick Chubb, who isn't going to play for the first 4 games, but we'll likely see later on in the season. You cannot waste Amari Cooper. You cannot waste Jerry Jeudy. You cannot waste a very solid offensive line. You just cannot. So the Browns really need to think smart and strategically about the quarterback room. And I personally think it's a mistake to keep DTR. I would have kept Tyler Huntley and Jameis Winston together. But from what the reports say, it looks like they are going to be taking calls on possibly Winston or Huntley. I personally say the Browns should eye on keeping Jameis Winston and possibly move off of Tyler Huntley, just because I think Jameis Winston has a bigger sample size and can be a pretty solid backup quarterback when the chance comes. The Buffalo Bills reportedly waiving Frank Gore Jr. To me, that's an interesting move. He had a good preseason. I don't think he's going to be a guy that could carry the ball play after play after play, so I kind of see the Buffalo Bills' standpoint in that. But to me, I think they need to have more running backs in order to take that pressure off of Josh Allen, because they rely on him so much for their running game. They need to have a high-depth running back room because they need guys to get yards so Josh Allen doesn't always have to. Because I think based on the style of running QB play from time to time, major injuries could happen, and the Buffalo Bills certainly cannot afford that with Josh Allen. I think it would have been smart for the Bills to keep Frank Gore Jr., but because they didn't, obviously that's going to kind of alleviate the running back room there a little bit, and clearly it shows that they really do rely on Josh Allen to run the football a little bit as well. And he has great running game potential, and he's shown that he's pretty much an Iron Man in terms of he doesn't get hurt super duper frequently. So, granted, the Bills are probably making the right decision, but for me, that was another interesting move that happened earlier today. I'm kind of stunned by that one. Frank Gore Jr. is not going to be with the Buffalo Bills. Reports also saying Juju Smith-Schuster will be back with the Kansas City Chiefs. To me, they still lack weapons, and I feel like this is so far the best they can do, but I honestly don't think it matters too much. Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, that's pretty much your offense if you're the Kansas City Chiefs. They should be just fine in terms of where they're at. Still very interesting that the Chiefs picked back up Juju Smith-Schuster. To me, I don't know if necessarily he fit the entire offensive scheme. He really wasn't that much of a difference maker for them, but he's good enough where I think he's a mid-tier wide receiver at this point. And if you can get the ball to him, I think the Kansas City Chiefs are in business. But either way, I think Patrick Mahomes is going to find a way to get the ball into anyone's hands. You can honestly throw a rookie wide receiver out there who's never played a snap and he's undrafted, and I think Patrick Mahomes will find a way to get that guy the football. Same thing when it comes to the fact that they just released Toney as well. To me, Toney is not that much of a productive NFL wide receiver. He's had some moments, but a lot of the moments he's had were actually bad, not good. But he has had some decent catches. I think the Chiefs should give him some credit for that. But obviously, this Chiefs offense has been very different since Tyreek Hill went to the Dolphins. And so, Juju Smith-Schuster, a decent pickup, I think, for the Chiefs. But I don't expect him to be a huge game changer. They already have those game changers anyway, in Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce. Another report that the Patriots have waived quarterback Bailey Zappi. I feel like Bailey Zappi was really well believed in by Bill Belichick when he was there, and now that they're going the Gerard Mayo direction, he is definitely going to look at some different aspects at quarterback. Obviously, you bring in Drake May. You have Jacoby Brissett there. It's a little bit of a different room, obviously, and the Patriots on paper should be pretty bad anyway. So this move doesn't surprise me, but I did see that earlier today. He had some significant games for the Patriots, including a blowout win over the Browns back in 2022. But Bailey Zappi, I don't think, is really a quarterback that has got a high ceiling. Cardinals releasing Desmond Ridder, according to reports. I think that move is also very much so needed for the Cardinals. I think Kyler Murray is obviously the guy they're going to continue to ride with. Obviously, Jonathan Gannon believes much so in him from what we saw last year. And Kyler Murray has had his moments. Other than that, I don't think the quarterback depth is very much in Arizona right now because I'm not personally a huge believer in Kyler Murray. But even with that said, if Desmond Ridder ever had to come in and play a game for the Arizona Cardinals, I think all he would have to do is try to get the ball to Marvin Harrison Jr., and you'd be smooth sailing. And I think that's what Kyler Murray's going to do if the Arizona Cardinals are going to have a good season, because I truly believe Arizona is one of those teams not many people are looking at that could be surprisingly good as long as Kyler Murray gets the ball to Marvin Harrison Jr., because Marvin Harrison Jr. is that much of a difference maker. But we could talk about that another day. How about the Dallas Cowboys extending CeeDee Lamb? Per sources, I think that was actually a really good choice by Dallas. They have a lot of contracts they have to figure out this year, and a lot of people think the Dallas Cowboys are just going to collapse off and have a bad season. I don't think the Dallas Cowboys are going to be particularly good, but to me, that's a good move for the Cowboys in terms of their offense. Obviously, we got to see how consistent Dak Prescott is this year. We have to see the defense and what happens with Micah Parsons, obviously. The Dallas Cowboys have some cachet to them, but the problem is we don't know if it's all going to come together in the postseason. But I would still keep the Dallas Cowboys as a bubble team if they could possibly do something. I still think they're going to make the playoffs this year. I don't think it's just going to be a complete collapse like a lot of people in the media believe. To me, the Dallas Cowboys do have a lot of talent on that roster. But by no stretch am I saying that's a Super Bowl contender. I very much so believe that they would be an easy first round out, and this will be a down year for them. But obviously, another thing that came out from the Dallas Cowboys, Mike McCarthy discussing the fact that he wants to focus on things week to week as opposed to just playoff results. And in my opinion, Mike McCarthy was 100% spot on. I don't know why there's so much outrage for quotes like that. Like you got to make the playoffs before you can even judge the playoffs. So yes, is there pressure on the Cowboys to win a playoff game? Yes. Is there pressure on the Cowboys to win out week to week? Yes, because they have to do that in order to make the playoffs. So before we get off the scale about Mike McCarthy really freaking out about just wanting to go week to week as opposed to going just to the playoff result, totally justified. I think it's fine, and I think a lot of people are just freaking out about that for no reason. And the Packers also trading for Malik Willis, an interesting report that I saw as well. To me, I think that's a good move for them. I think the Titans kind of have a different style of quarterback that they're going to be expecting out of Will Levis, so they need to have a different backup room for him. I think that makes sense, though, because I see Malik Willis playing more like a Jordan Love style of football. But granted, I don't think the ceiling is very high for them, nor do I think he'll ever be as good as Jordan Love is so far. So, for me, I think the Packers, that makes sense. It makes more sense for their quarterback room. I think they're in good shape to continue success, building upon that with Jordan Love already leading the charge there. So we'll have to see what takes place, but I think Malik Willis leaving the Titans, better for him, better for the Packers, and I think it's a win-win in that situation. And I think getting compensation, Tennessee got a little lucky with that, and Green Bay, I think, gave up a little too much. I think maybe you just wait a little bit till the cuts take place. Going to go back to my Browns for a minute. So they were 0-3 in the preseason, and I think a lot of people in Cleveland in particular are starting to panic a little bit because we clearly see that there's been something going on with Deshaun Watson. What? We don't know. Obviously, he was feeling some soreness, so it was the smart idea to not play him. So I think the injury hysteria is going to start to come up a little bit. I maybe shouldn't say hysteria, but injury panic for Deshaun maybe starting to come up a little bit. I think that is something that is going to start to roam around Cleveland a little bit, especially because Deshaun has been hurt, and it has impacted this football team in significant ways. So there's going to be concern with that because we need Deshaun Watson to play a majority of the season. I don't want to say a full season because it's honestly really hard to ask to get 17 games out of guys anymore because of injuries. So I think you just need to focus on having Deshaun Watson in for a majority of the season. And what that meaning 13, 14 games, maybe those other 3 played by Winston or Huntley or DTR, whoever the Browns decide to keep outside of DTR and Deshaun Watson. But I think that's going to be a big thing to look at in terms of how the Browns scope this offense. And as I said, I think we overreact a little bit to little things. The preseason to me means nothing. No one's playing number 1s and 2s at the same time. And if they are, it's for very short stints. They came back in the Seattle game, which should make you feel better about backups, but the Browns losing every preseason game, it means squat for the regular season. It means nothing. Yeah, the pace of play needs to be better in the regular season. It's gonna be. It's gonna be. The Browns don't want to reveal much of their offense or defense in the preseason because then other teams start to scheme it. I think the Dallas Cowboys week 1 are doing the same thing. They might scheme some stuff from what the Browns showed in the preseason games, but they're going to be looking back on last year's tape because last year's tape is where we saw the Browns defense. Are they going to try to do those same kind of schemes again under Jim Schwartz when they play Dallas? And the Cowboys offensive staff is going to be preparing for that. Same thing goes for the Browns offensive staff preparing for the Cowboys defense. I don't think they're looking at the schemes in the preseason. They're looking back at last year's film because the Cowboys have a lot of the same guys they had last year too. And the same thing goes on the offensive side of the ball. Now, what may be a little more challenging for the Dallas Cowboys in particular is Deshaun Watson. We have such a small sample size of him in a Browns uniform. It's going to be different when you see the Joe Flacco offense from last year, or the DTR offense from last year, or the PJ Walker offense from last year. I mean, it's just going to be different. And I'm not even going to throw the Jeff Driscoll offense because that was only for 1 game. That's going to be the thing I think people don't really look at when it comes to focusing to week 1 of the season. Is we see all this stuff in the preseason. Yeah, was the pace of play slow? Sure. The Browns could have speeded up in the preseason. I'm not worried about L's to the Packers, Vikings, and Seahawks in the preseason. I'm not. If they were regular season games, I'm hitting the panic button. There weren't. We're good. Final cuts are going to come out, and we just need to watch week 1. Because week 1 is going to present to us what this football team can and can't be. But you really can't judge an NFL team until about 4 or 5 weeks of the season, in my opinion. And that's mainly because then you have much more of a sample size of the consistencies of the team and the downsides to the team. And I think we saw that last year with the Browns in their first 4 games. We saw the potential they had when they started 3-1, and we saw some significant flaws like in the Pittsburgh game they lost week 2 on Monday night last year. So to me, let's just take the preseason for what it was, move on, get to the final cuts, and everything will be just fine. And that's for all NFL teams. I know I'm speaking it from a perspective of my Browns, but that's for all NFL teams. I'm sure fans in LA or Green Bay or Kansas City or Detroit, they're not panicking about what's going on in the preseason. They're much more worried about their week 1 opponents and how they match up. And they're not going to be looking just at film from the preseason. They're going to be looking at last year's tape and some college tape on the players that were just drafted that may be starters. That's what they're going to be keeping an eye on, and that's what they have to prepare for. And I think all 32 teams in the league know what they're doing when it comes to that, and we'll have to see who executes better week 1 when it arrives. Also want to emphasize the Pittsburgh Steelers were 0-3 in the preseason too. And I don't think anything about the preseason in terms of the Pittsburgh Steelers is going to apply to their regular season. We're just going to have to see what happens when the Browns and Steelers meet on the field later this year. They meet within a 3-week span, by the way, twice. And I believe the Browns play Denver in between. I had to check with who the Steelers play, but that's going to be interesting. I like when those divisional matchups are close up. I know a lot of people may disagree with me on that, but I like it because it honestly kind of fuels fire to the rivalry in some ways. In 2019, when the Browns played the Steelers, there was some fire thrown on the rivalry, not just because of the incident that took place, which was terrible in that one Thursday night game, but nevertheless, I think it's good to kind of have rivalries be fired up a little bit. And I think it was during that 3-week span back in 2019. All right, let's talk about some baseball now. My Cleveland Guardians are really in a rough patch. They did take 2 of 3 from Texas. And the game they lost against the Rangers, honestly, I don't put as much on the offense as I did Tanner Bybee. He cannot give up 4 earned runs in the second inning. That's really what cost us that game, in my opinion. But the offense has been struggling. Steven Kwan, I think, needs to just learn how to hit ground balls again. He's not doing that. He's popping out so much. Once Steven Kwan kind of gets out of this slump, that makes me a little bit more confident. We've seen flashes of Jose and Josh Naylor also getting out of their slumps to some degree. They had some home runs against Texas on Saturday, but ultimately it's been a struggle for the Guardians, and the series they're playing with the Kansas City Royals right now is no different. And I personally think they're going to lose the season series to the Royals, but they could still recover and try to win this division, but they need to win these next 2 games. And I'm nervous about the next 2 games. Michael Lorenzen, who's pitching tonight as I record this for the Kansas City Royals, is coming off 7 scoreless innings. 7 scoreless innings. Guardians have Gavin Williams tonight, which makes me feel confident. However, we have seen Gavin Williams have some troublesome games at times. And that's kind of to be expected from a guy who's been hurt a good portion of the year. But Gavin Williams, I think, if he has one of those good outings, can't compete with Michael Lorenzen tonight because Lorenzen's had some flaws of his own with Kansas City. And you look at that Royals bullpen, they're not very good. If you can get to them in late innings, they're going to give up runs. So to me, the Guardians offense just needs to start hitting. The pitching, I think, is coming into form, and the bullpen has had some hiccups the last couple days. Hunter Gaddis shouldn't have had to pitch to Bobby Witt. I don't know why he did, just walk him, but nevertheless, he did pitch to Bobby Witt, and the Guardians ended up losing that game, and that was the run that cost them. So I think when you look at the Guardians right now, and as a Guardians fan, what makes me excited is I still think the bullpen has all that potential. But what makes me very nervous is these 2 games against Kansas City. They're now 1 game trailing on you in the AL Central. You have to respond to it. You have to. You got to win today, you got to win tomorrow, and it's not going to be an easy task because Kansas City, to me, on paper, should win this division as of right now. I would put the Royals over the Guardians. I think on paper the Twins are the best team, but because the Royals have shown so much strength in winning, they just win games they shouldn't a lot of the time. I think Kansas City has the potential to really shock the world and win this division, but I would actually trust the Guardians and I trust the Twins more in a playoff series than the Royals. I think they're going to be flawed when it comes to the postseason, but right now I think you look at where things stand in the AL Central. The Guardians don't have to panic on the essence of I think they have a playoff spot. I don't want to say pretty much in the bag, but I think it's looking really good seeing where Boston, Seattle, and Tampa Bay are right now. I don't think they're going to catch up all the way to where the Guardians are. So I think the wild card spot is safe. But if you want to win this division, you got to take these 2 games. You play Pittsburgh this weekend. You got to take at least 2 or 3. I'd say 3 of 3. I'm going to one of the games this weekend, so I'm really pumped up to see what happens with the Guardians against Pittsburgh. Hopefully that offense comes to life because the Pirates aren't very good. But you have to do that, and then you play Kansas City again next week, and you got to go take 2 or 3 from them there. The Guardians can honestly only really afford to lose 1 more game to Kansas City in the greater scheme of things, which is why I think they need to win these next 2 and take 2 or 3 next week, because then I think they have the tiebreaker. They would have the season series in case there's a tiebreaker. They already do with Minnesota, but obviously they have to win other games too. But the season series I think is important because tiebreakers are so prevalent now in all the leagues. So that's one thing to keep in mind when it comes to the Guardians. And the other thing is, can this offense get going again? We need to see Steven Kwan, Jose Ramirez, and Josh Naylor get out of that slump. I know I talked about this in the last edition of Raw Takes, but we really, really need to see that. Steven Kwan especially. He's been a mess. He's popping everything. Hit some ground balls again, and we'll be good to go. You don't win World Series titles by hitting home runs. You win them by hitting the ball on the ground to score runs and pitching. In my opinion, that's how you win a World Series. The 2015 Kansas City Royals, for example, 24th or 25th in the league in home runs and won it all. And the Kansas City Royals, I think their future is very bright because that organization has shown they are willing to spend as much money as possible to win it all when their window comes. And I think this year their window is starting to open up vastly. When you look at that rotation, pretty dang good. When you look at that lineup, okay, needs some more work, but Bobby Witt Jr. is obviously a machine when it comes to just hitting the baseball. Other guys like Vinny Pasquantino and Salvador Perez as guys who can hit some power when it comes to it. I still think they're really a two-man show with Bobby Witt and Pasquantino and Perez hitting some power here and there. So 2 to 3 man show, honestly, for the Royals. And that's why I think they'll falter in the postseason, especially because that bullpen is just awful. But the Royals window's opening up. I see the Royals being a problem in Major League Baseball in years to come. And they were pretty awful for quite some time, but their window is definitely starting to roll up a little bit. And as I said, on paper, Minnesota is a team I would have faith that the Guardians play them in the preseason because they've been so disappointing. But on paper, I think they're the best team in the AL Central, and they've kind of underperformed this season. But when you really look at the AL right now, I think there's 6 teams you keep in mind. You keep in mind the Guardians, you keep in mind the Yankees, the Orioles, the Houston Astros, and the Minnesota Twins, and the Kansas City Royals. And I just want to emphasize how great it is for baseball that there is 3 teams in the AL Central in contention, because we've talked about how awful the AL Central has been over the years. This year, the AL Central improving, I think, argues the argument to keep divisions more and make it more competitive in that aspect of things. I've kind of been on the fence with saying maybe you need to get rid of divisions or maybe you need to keep them, but in terms of history of the game, the divisions have made sense. I think that is definitely something that the Guardians, Royals, and Twins have proven by all 3 of them being good in the Central. Obviously, the NL Central has to make an argument on why that division is so awful, because Milwaukee is just going to run away with winning the NL Central. St. Louis is behind 8 or 9 games, I think, right now, maybe 7. So Milwaukee should easily take that division, no problem whatsoever. That's going to be a problem in baseball, obviously, when you look at the NL Central. But I'm glad the AL Central is making a significant case, because the Guardians, as much on paper as they don't look like a good team, they are a good organization. Stephen Vogt, clearly a great managing hire right now. Since Chris Antonetti has joined the then Indians, now Guardians at the time, he has done a terrific job bringing in great talent at good prices and being in contention. The Guardians have always been in contention when Chris Antonetti has been team president. So you have to give the Guardians credit on that. And I think Minnesota is a good organization as well. They've been in it for a while now. And Kansas City, they had a little bit of a slump, but like I said, when they're in contention, they tend to spend to win. And I think that window is going to start to slowly open up for Kansas City in years going on. And I think it's good for baseball to have a solid division in the AL Central. Right now, looks like the best division in the American League. But you probably could argue that is helped by the Chicago White Sox. But honestly, the White Sox have played AL Central teams pretty well. Even though the White Sox are a mess, I still think that helps the fact that the AL Central has such good records from Kansas City, Cleveland, and Minnesota. You look at the National League right now, obviously Philadelphia kind of getting a little bit of a high right now with Ranger Suarez coming back to the lineup and having a good outing. Philadelphia, to me, still is a really streaky team. I don't know if they're going to win the World Series, but I think Philadelphia is going to make a lot of teams' lives hell. They are pretty feisty, they're pretty young, and they're pretty good. You look at Bryce Harper being in their lineup, it's still kind of like a 2-3 man lineup in Philadelphia as well. But that's a good lineup. It's a good rotation. Philadelphia is definitely better than the Atlanta Braves this year. I think the Atlanta Braves kind of had the soul sucked out of them when Ronald Acuna Jr. got hurt and Spencer Strider got hurt. And so, for me, Atlanta is definitely still a bubble wildcard team that I don't think anyone wants to play, because the Braves have been so good in recent years. And always a challenge to take them on. But, when the dance happens, you never know. Any team could make it. Arizona did it last year. And Arizona's pretty good right now. The LA Dodgers, you look at them, they're pretty darn good looking at their lineup and rotation. Milwaukee has probably the best bullpen in the National League. I don't want anything to do with Milwaukee, honestly, if I'm going to the postseason in the National League. There's some dangerous teams in Major League Baseball this year. And I think it's really good for the sport because we've seen so much competition between a variety of different teams. Usually we've seen this over the last couple of years, and this may be to fruition this year. How many times have Houston, Cleveland, and New York been the top of the divisions? Quite a few the last couple seasons. That goes all the way back to 2015, 2016. I mean, the New York Yankees, Cleveland Guardians, and Houston Astros have won the division so much over the last year. Houston Astros have been in so many American League Championship Series. Every single one, at least, since 2017. That's a good organization, minus the scandal that took place in 2017. You take that out, Houston's always in the mix. They always are in the mix, and they still are this year. Houston looked like they were having a down year and were about to get destroyed by the Mariners and Rangers. And what happened? The Rangers are probably one of the worst defending World Series champions ever. And you look at the Seattle Mariners, and they're a mess. They fired their manager. They can't hit. They trade for Arozarena. So far, not looking like the best thing in the world for them in terms of their lineup. But they're a mess, Seattle is right now. And they're bubbling 500. A team that honestly looked like they were going to cakewalk the AL West. And the Houston Astros are still prevailing with it. And the division's a little bit tougher. The Oakland A's, and this is another point I want to bring up real quick. We thought last year the Oakland A's were just going to be the worst team ever after a 12-50 start. The White Sox are putting that team as though they were a World Series contender. So I just want to say that about the Chicago White Sox. I legitimately think the White Sox might finish 42-120. That's how bad they are. And they are on pace to do that. They may only win 11 more games. Heck, they may not even win 40 games. That's how bad they are. And we haven't seen a team be as bad as this year's White Sox, I think, since the New York Mets in 1961. But that team was an expansion team, so they had kind of more of an excuse. The White Sox were in the ALDS 3 years ago. No idea what they're doing now. They are a mess. A train wreck in Chicago. I mean, when you look at Major League Baseball, I think kind of a problem for the sport has been owners not spending as much money as they probably should be. The fact we always talk about the New York Yankees and Boston Red Sox, although the Red Sox not as much in recent years, headlining the World Series contention. Houston Astros now really coming into that conversation too. Having the same teams in the mix year after year after year, I think it's tiresome for fans. I think it was a problem for the NBA a few years back when we saw Golden State and Cleveland in the finals every year. And I'm a Cleveland fan, I'm telling you that. That's not good for the sport to have two teams make it every year. Baseball, we see different teams make the World Series every year, but we always see New York, Cleveland, and Houston really win the division, at least in the American League. We always see those same teams contending. So it's good to have consistent contenders, but I think you have to mix up the teams to some degree. And in recent years, Major League Baseball has been doing that. The New York Yankees missed the playoffs last year along with the Boston Red Sox. And Baltimore and Tampa Bay were leading the AL East almost all year last year. And the Rays are not having the year they did last year this year, and Baltimore is still pretty darn good. So I think it's good that the teams are getting mixed up a little bit in Major League Baseball. It's good for the sport, it's good for exposure, and it's good for every team in every market. Every market likes to see different teams in it. And like I said with the NBA, when we saw Golden State and Cleveland 4 years in a row, it was definitely, I think, waning on the traditional NBA fan that just wants to watch basketball. They want to see different teams and different players make the dance. And I think Major League Baseball is doing a good job with that. But of course, in terms of the World Series, we've seen different World Series champions essentially every year. I can't remember the last time one's repeated. I know the Houston Astros won 2 in a 5-year span, but that's about it. Most teams have been winning it essentially 1 year and bowing out, and then they're still in contention to a degree, excluding the Texas Rangers. Right now, they haven't been in contention since they won the World Series, nor were they before they won the World Series. So they're an interesting situation there in Texas right now. But that's my thoughts on it. I definitely think the Major League Baseball field has looked a lot better, mixing it up a little bit. But ultimately, the American League may still come down to New York, Cleveland, and Houston winning those divisions. All right, that's going to be it for this edition of Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. Thank you so much for joining the show today. Don't forget to check me out on Twitter/X, Hoty Andrew. I'm always down to be giving more Raw Takes. Just reach out to me directly, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. You could also check me out on Facebook, Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. We have the Facebook page up and running now, or on Instagram. Reach out to me there, and I'll try to get back to you too. You can reach out to me there at Hoty Raw Takes. I'm always down to give some more of my Raw Takes, because that's what I'm all about here on this show. I'm Andrew Hoty, and these are my Raw Takes. Please like and subscribe, and we'll be back later on this week for more takes on sports. Have a good one, everybody.